Hi everyone, it's good to see you. Before we start, can you please turn to just one neighbor, someone that you did not come with, and tell each other two or three adjectives. I am or I feel. Okay, so whatever emotion you came in with, I want you to go ahead and really, really quickly, not a conversation, just like 2 words, describe. Go. Okay, those are conversations, just really quick words. Okay. How many I'm tired did you guys hear? Were there a lot? Was that like the majority of what the words were? I'm tired. I know some of you guys have sick kids or you have young kids, or some of you guys are pursuing a master's degree while you're working or you're momming or dadding. Some of you guys have sleep apnea, so I know, like some of you guys are, of course you're tired. But I would say on the whole, as a society, we're too tired. It's not right. It's not the way life is. We're used to it being that way, but that's not the way it should be. That's not the life Jesus has envisioned for us. For us to be like, how are you? Tired. Every day next week, how are you? Yeah, I'm really tired. Is that the life Jesus has envisioned for us? No. Something has to change. And one thing I'm beginning to be more convicted about is that we need to practice Sabbath to find true rest. When I say the word Sabbath, I'm sure there are various things that go through your mind. I was just curious, did anybody grow up practicing like Jewish Sabbath, like Friday sundown to Saturday sundown? Just curious if anybody did. Okay, most of us haven't, or none of us have in this room. I grew up thinking that the Sabbath was just not working, not doing homework, and just going to church. And that's the extent of my thoughts on it. Is that somewhere along the lines of how you guys grew up? Just Sabbath means no working, no homework? Or was it something different?
We still have to do homework.
Oh, you still have to do homework. Okay. But basically, I think the gist of our Christian evangelical culture has been just you don't work. And that's the extent of our Sabbath. So as a pastor, I call Monday my Sabbath, but really it just meant I didn't do church work, and instead I would do errands and do the Costco run and pay my bills and all those kind of things. And spoiler alert, that is not Sabbath. But I used to tell people, oh, I'm Sabbathing on Monday, so nobody would email me or text me, but I wasn't really Sabbathing, and we'll talk about that some more. And then a few years ago at staff meetings, Doris started saying, I'm gonna really try Sabbathing. And I was like, oh, good for you, like, you do you, and I didn't think much about it. I never thought about, should we as Christians practice Sabbath? So this whole world of truly practicing God's rest is new and foreign. Would anybody say they've ever heard us, like, have you studied it? I'm just curious, like, has anyone studied it or kind of familiar with the topic of Sabbath? Okay, so this is pretty foreign to us. It wasn't until recently that I came across these sermons that, from John Mark Comer. We've been using a lot of his stuff in talking about apprenticeship, that this whole idea of Sabbath became clear in my mind. And then, of course, I somehow sent it to Jane and One, and then they started listening to it, and they started Sabbathing, and I think since last fall. And it's been so great watching them up close and to see in Exhibit A, I think of what Jay's just practicing the disciplines and seeing the fruit of that. And it's given me some FOMO, so I'm so glad to be journeying with them. But I haven't been intentionally practicing Sabbath very long. Technically, I shouldn't be preaching about it. David and Doris and I were at a conference on Friday with John Mark Comer and Tyler Staten, and they basically were practicing Sabbath for years before they led their staff into Sabbathing for 2 years, and then they preached on it. I have not been practicing it for very long, so I shouldn't be preaching on it, but I'm learning with you guys. What if we badly misunderstood the practice of Sabbath and we're missing out on something very beautiful and very vital to our life? What if by not practicing Sabbath, we have not been following Jesus well, or to experience the life to the full that he promises? What if instead of when people ask how you are, you're not always saying, I'm so tired? What if instead of feeling harried and restless, you felt at rest and at peace? Like, think about when's the last time you felt at rest and at peace? It's kind of like an anomaly in today's world. What if instead of being triggered by your whiny kids, your tank was so full? to be able to deal with them in the way that they needed to be dealt with? What if you went into work tomorrow with joy instead of being the same like your coworkers, like, oh, I hate coming to work or whatever? What would happen to your life and to the lives around you? I want to start a movement. And this is not happening just in our church. When Doris and David and I went to the conference on Friday, and it was about some of the stuff, like the spiritual disciplines, there were 47 denominations present in that. Over 500 pastors and leaders in that conference. There were 144 churches that came to hear, how do we get these spiritual disciplines in us? Because we need to change. If we keep doing Jesus the same way we've been doing, it hasn't been effective. I mean, not completely ineffective. We could be more effective. What would happen if we took this seriously? So, what is Sabbath? It's from the Hebrew word Shabbat, which means to stop. So I want you guys to think about Shabbat as like clocking out, right? Those, I don't know if you ever had one of those jobs where you punch in your card. I always wanted to, never had one of those, but it seems fun. But that's what you think about that's what Shabbat means, to clock out, to stop working. So in biblical times, and for people adhering to the Jewish practice of Sabbath, that refers to sundown on Friday night for a 24-hour period. What they do is they light candles, they recite some psalms together, they have dinner with loved ones and family, they pray together, then they go to synagogue the next day, and they don't work for 24 hours. I was listening to the Bible Project guys, and Tim Mackey lived there for a year in Jerusalem, and he said that around sundown, you could hear like a trumpet saying, do, 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 everyone, it's half an hour left, and so there's this huge bustle in the marketplace to buy all your stuff for Shabbat meal, and then half an hour later, silence, no cars, nobody selling stuff in the markets, just quiet. And so he said that he and his wife would walk around Jerusalem, and if it was summer and people's windows were open, you could just walk down the streets of Jerusalem and you hear different families worshiping together. Like, wouldn't that be amazing to experience that, or to do that ourselves? So countercultural. So though you all are here, some kind of like, you're here on like maybe our Christian Sabbath. I want to suggest that there's so much more to Sabbath than what we have ever realized or thought about. So in our HG curriculum, Worship HG, we've done 2 sessions now. Fraser Heights HG, we will do number 1 this week. I'm really excited to do this with you guys. We're looking at Sabbath practice as a time set aside. It's like your intentional time set aside every week to stop, rest, delight, and worship. I don't know if you've ever thought of Sabbath in that way, but that's how we're going to be practicing it. So I'm really glad that we're learning about this and practicing together in our HGs, because you're going to get more practical stuff there. The Maximizer in me is dying to tell you everything all at once, but it's a series, so I'll let Jimmy and Doris fill you guys in too. So today I just want to try to persuade you through scripture to not just be like, oh, that's good for you, Aeri, that's good for you, John or Jay. I don't want you to think of it that way. I want you to think of, what have I been missing out on, and how can I embrace this in my life? I want to try to convince you to take this seriously. So, what is the overarching story? There's actually a story of Sabbath in the Bible. You can trace it. If you want to listen to 14 plus hours of the Bible podcast, guys, breaking this down, it's really amazing. But let's look at the first time that God mentioned Sabbath in Genesis 2. Let's read this together. On the 7th day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. So we know this, God creates the world in 6 days, and he Sabbaths, or he rests on the 7th and declaring it holy. Then let's look, 70 chapters later to Exodus 20. I'll just read this out to you guys. This is what Moses says in the 10 Commandments. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest, dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the 7th day, he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. So God institutes Sabbath because he rested. He sets the precedent, and we imitate him. That's what Moses says. This is why we observe the Sabbath. Again, in Deuteronomy, Moses is reviewing the laws. This is right before they enter the promised land. And he's like, I want you guys to remember the covenant that we made with God. Here are the 10 Commandments. And the only thing that's different, if you look down to verse 15, he says, remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. So there's a difference in Deuteronomy. In Exodus, he's like, we Sabbath because God did it, and so we follow his example. But in Deuteronomy, he's like, you once were slaves, and God freed you, so celebrate the Sabbath in honor of what I have done. And so also, when you rest, everybody else in your household gets to rest, even your animals. Don't put them to work. Everyone needs to rest. You once were slaves, let your household also have a rest. Okay, so it's different reasoning for why we should observe the Sabbath. So when we think of this command, we look at both the reasons, right? Creation and liberation. That's how we should look at the Sabbath. And then I want to show you guys the Bible Project video. Let's look at the rest of how Sabbath has unfolded in the story of the Bible. Thank you, Sarah.
The number 7 is a big deal in the Bible.
Yeah, in biblical Hebrew, the word 7 is connected to the idea of fullness or completeness.
And that's something we all long for, but don't often experience. Instead, we find ourselves working endlessly, fighting back chaos with no real rest.
Yes. Now keep all that in mind as we turn to Genesis 1 in the Bible. It begins with darkness and disorder, but then God speaks to bring about light and order so that life can flourish.
And this happens over the course of 6 days.
Each day is marked with the phrase, there was evening and there was morning. But on the 7th day, something special happens.
God stops and rests.
Right. Creation is brought to its completion on the 7th day. And that phrase, there was evening and there was morning, it doesn't appear on day 7.
It's like a day with no end.
On the 7th day, God's presence fills his creation. The land provides for all of God's creatures, including humans, who are appointed to rule the world with God forever.
Kings and queens of the 7th day rest. I can get into that.
But the humans are deceived by a dark power, and they forfeit that rest. They're exiled into the wilderness, where they have to work as slaves to the land.
Until they die and return to the dust from which they came.
But God wants to restore humanity back to that 7th day rest. So he chooses to give the family of Israel that experience of ultimate rest so they can share it with others.
But how? They're in Egypt, slaves to an oppressive empire who's grinding them into the dust.
So God confronts Egypt and he liberates the Israelites, taking them through the darkness and chaos on the way to the promised land.
Now, while they're on their way, they find themselves in the wilderness. It's easy to get lost, life is a struggle, they're not in the land of rest yet.
But while they're on the way, God invites them in the wilderness to start living as if they're in the promised land.
But how do you practice the future rest in the wilderness?
Well, God tells them that every 7th day they are to stop their work, or in Hebrew, to Shabbat, so that they can rest and enjoy God's good world.
So take a whole day to live as if the ultimate rest has already come.
Yeah, this is the Sabbath, celebrated every week on the 7th day. But there's more. The Sabbath is just one of 7 festivals that Israel practiced every year, each one anticipating that 7th day rest.
That is a lot of 7s.
And there's even more. Every 7 years, the Israelites were to liberate slaves, forgive debts, and let the land rest for a whole year. And then, every 7 times 7 years was the ultimate 7th day rest, called the Year of Jubilee. If anyone had lost their land or gone into debt, all was forgiven, everything restored.
Wow, so the Sabbath, these feasts, the Year of Jubilee, it's all pointing towards the hope of future rest.
Right. Now, when the Israelites went into the land, they forgot their God, and so they forfeited their chance for rest in the promised land.
They're exiled and enslaved again by an oppressive nation, led back into a world of chaos and disorder.
But Israel's prophets said that their exile would end one day, and that the ultimate jubilee of freedom and rest would come, but generations go by, and they're still waiting.
It's at this dark point in the story that Jesus appears, and he launches his public mission on a Sabbath day.
Yeah, he read aloud from the scroll of Isaiah, saying that it was time for all captives and slaves to be released, because this was the year of the Lord's favor.
What did he mean? This is the year of the Lord's favor.
He was talking about the ultimate jubilee.
So Jesus is claiming that seventh day rest would come through him.
Right, he said that he was the Lord of the Sabbath, and he confronted disorder and darkness in all of its forms, liberating people from sickness, sin, even from death itself.
Yet, Jesus was killed, so even his work was undone.
Well, it seemed that way. But notice, Jesus timed his death to take place at the end of the week. His body rested in a tomb during the Sabbath, and on the 8th day, he rose from the dead.
Oh wait, the 8th day? You mean the first day of a new week?
Exactly. Jesus' resurrection was like the first day of a new creation, where God's light and life broke into the darkness.
So because of the resurrection, we have hope in God's promise of future rest. But we're not there yet. It's like we're still in the wilderness, where we experience struggle and pain.
But as we journey towards that ultimate seventh day, Jesus invites us to experience a taste of real rest now by following him. Or in his words, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest."
So good. Have you ever thought of Sabbath in the story of creation all the way through? If you look at the story of Genesis to the end of the Old Testament, you see that God keeps providing rest. Rest, come away with me. And the people keep forfeiting the privilege through the rejection of him. Garden of Eden, freedom from slavery to Egypt, the commandment to Sabbath. He's like saying, take a day off. It's your boss saying, take a day off. They're like, no thanks. The feasts and festivals, Jubilee, the Promised Land, all these were acts of God to provide his children with rest. And they are constantly rejected, and people constantly saying, I kind of want to do it my own way, God. Thanks for the feasts and festivals, but I want to do it my own way. And so they're exiled. So where is the rest that God had promised all throughout the Old Testament? Enter Jesus. He arrives on the scene and announces that finally true rest is found in him. So think about the centuries of enslavement, captivity, exile, and finally in Jesus comes the full rest. So we see that in Luke 4 that Jesus starts his public ministry on the Sabbath day, reading from the scroll of Isaiah that announces the ultimate Sabbath, the ultimate Jubilee, that he had come to set his people free from sin, just as in the year of Jubilee, slaves were set free and debts were forgiven. He doesn't just say this, he then acts on it. And we see him healing the sick, raising the dead, freeing people from demon oppression. And he shows that he is the Lord of the Sabbath, that he wants to bring people rest and freedom. So all of the previous Sabbaths, and so now I kind of want to read Leviticus again with this lens in mind, because Tanaki made it a little more interesting. But all the previous Sabbaths and feasts, they're all pointing to Jesus, to a certain rest that would come in him. And he is finally here as our Lord of the Sabbath. And then when you look at where we are now, in history, we are now on our way where we will find that eternal rest when Jesus comes again and there's a new heaven and a new earth. That's the story that we belong to. We will someday enjoy full rest. Isn't that amazing? It's so amazing that at some point, that's the destination. That's where he started. The Garden of Eden is what the ideal was. But people rebelled. God gave them rest. They rebelled. God gave them rest. They rebelled. And that's how we live too, right? He wants to give us his rest. We rebel. But we're all marching towards that end goal of final eternal rest. That's the story. And I'm not just saying this to you guys to Bible nerd on you. When we lose sight of the biblical story, the big story that God has, and we take ourselves out of that timeline, and it's like, well, it's all about my life, me and my family, as long as we're okay, we're good. We're missing out on God's design for how it all works. We lose sight of God's activity in history. We miss out on participating in it. When I tell you guys, hey, from the Garden of Eden all the way through, we are a part of the story of God wanting us to enter his rest. It's not my life and then I'll somehow come into God at certain point. It's God's story and I get to be part of it. That's how we need to live our lives. Can I get an amen about that? So let's not miss out on participating in it. So just a really quick side note is observing the Sabbath still a command. Theologians are actually split on it. You'll find good theological sources for both sides. I don't have time to go down that path today. It seems like the early Christians were continuing to practice Sabbath even after Jesus rose again from the dead, but they were also meeting on the Lord's Day on Sunday to celebrate his resurrection. So probably good Jewish Christians were doing a Sabbath, 24-hour Sabbath on Saturday, and then Sunday night after work, they were probably doing a worship service together. That was the Lord's Day in honor of the resurrection. And then eventually Gentile Christians, they were like, we're not Jewish, so maybe we don't have to do that Jewish 24-hour time. But then they still would gather on the Lord's Day. And then in 321 AD, Constantine, the first Christian Roman emperor, decrees, okay, everyone, we're going to make Sunday a day off, and it's going to be called the Lord's Day. And that's kind of how we've ended up here. When you look at Romans chapter 14:5, Paul seems to not care about whether or not people celebrated it. So that's why some people are like, well, we don't have to do it, because this is what he says. You should each be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. Those who worship the Lord on a special day do it to honor him. So basically, he's just concerned. He's like, I want you to gather. I want you to worship God. I want you to remember the resurrection. I want you to remember that he's coming again soon. But don't judge other Christians about whether or not they practice the Jewish Sabbath. That's what that passage is about. So for us at New Joy, even though we don't think it's like a command, like we're breaking the fourth commandment if we don't observe Sabbath, we are looking at it in terms of Sabbath is still God's gift to us, and Sabbath is still wisdom. Look at the fabric of the way the creation happened. God actually inserted a day of rest. So that's kind of how we're looking at it. So for most of us, Gentile Christians, Sundays probably work best for Sabbath because we get to worship together. A lot of us like hang out and eat afterwards, and so this is a time to recalibrate, reset our lives on him. Okay, so but I want to say there's more to Sabbath than coming to church. Yes, please come to church. Okay, I'm not saying like, oh, Paul's like, whatever. No, Paul's like, I want you to honor the Lord on Resurrection Sundays. Every Sunday, I want you to honor the Lord on those days. But it's more than that, even though this is an important part of it. Okay, so why should we Sabbath? Somewhere along the way, we've let this precious gift of Sabbath go to the wayside. And when you look around and see anxiety, restlessness, exhaustion in our society and in us, we have to realize something needs to change. We can't keep going the same way. So we're still talking about apprenticeship here. Do you guys remember kind of the rubric that we're going by, apprenticeship? It is to be, not you, be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and to do what he did. Okay, very good. So we're still talking about apprenticeship here, and Sabbath is a core practice of the way of Jesus, right? So it's not like, Sabbath's going to answer everything, right? It's just one of the disciplines that's going to help us in our apprenticeship to become like Jesus, okay? It's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve everything, but slowly, over time, as we Sabbath, the life of Jesus will be formed in us, right? Now, I know we want immediate results. We want to Amazon Prime it, but there's no such thing when we talk about Jesus being formed in us. It is a slow, year after year, community with our community, slowly over time, having Jesus formed in us is going to be a long process. I showed you guys this quote, those of you guys who are at retreat. I want to revisit it again. This is what Tish Harrison Warren says. God meets us in moments of ecstasy and beauty, and God meets us in depths of despair. But the vast majority, I think it's the slide with the graph. There you go, thanks. God meets us in moments of ecstasy and beauty, and God meets us in depths of despair. But the vast majority of our life is not in those places. And so if we're sort of waiting for those experiences to meet God, we never get there. So we can meet God in the mountaintops. I'm thinking Kristen and Kona right now, who I just talked with her last night, and they are just a bunch of kids that came in to YWAM like dry, hardened heart. They're just like on fire for Jesus right now. And I mean, what happens when you have like 500 college kids, just like in a room, like jumping up and down for 2 hours and praying, prayer boot camps and all this kind of stuff. She is there for 6 months, and then she has to come home at some point, right? Or I think about what's happening at Asbury University. Have you guys been following what's happening in Asbury? It's crazy. It's just a simple chapel service last Wednesday in Kentucky, in the States. It was just a regular chapel service. Some kids started to hang out and to pray afterwards. That prayer never ended. Since last Wednesday, today is day 11, and it's been 24/7. And people are driving, and there's a mile around snaking people who are trying to get into the building just to be part of God's move in that building. And so then even during, in the parking lot, or even while they're waiting outside, they have these like TVs outside, and people are worshiping, and they're repenting their sins, they're praying, they're interceding for the world, they're interceding for Gen Z. Like all this amazing stuff is happening, and Honestly, I look at those like Instagram videos and I'm like, I have such FOMO, like, I want to be in that building, you know? What is it like to have a bunch of Gen Zs worshiping and praying and interceding? They're like not on their phones. They're sitting there and worshiping. They're praying for one another. It's an amazing act of God. But at some point, and actually they are now putting parameters around it, because they can't keep doing this 24/7. Someone needs to clean the building and all that kind of stuff. So, but this has happened since last Wednesday. But I think too, it's like, well, what happens now to those students? If they don't have practices in place to keep encountering God, that's gonna die out after some time. That's what just the way the world works, right? You can't just pray 24/7 for the rest of your life. So we need those moments of highs, and obviously most of us have gone through some really terrible things where I still feel like I haven't felt as close to God as when my dad died. There's nothing like it. Like, when you need God so desperately, you feel him so near. But I would say most of our life is in that middle. What do we do with that middle? If we're gonna keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to be formed by Jesus, we're deluding ourselves. We need to, if we want to go deeper in Jesus, something needs to change. So Sabbath practice can help us be intentional about meeting God in this ordinary. So why should we Sabbath? Number one, practicing Sabbath helps me to live in God's flow. It's built into the fabric of creation, way before it became a commandment, right? God created this rhythm of working and resting, working and resting. It's just the way life is. When we live in God's rhythm, we thrive. When we don't, we sabotage our own formation. I want you to picture a child who desperately needs a nap. Okay, picture all the stuff that happens when they're refusing to nap, but they desperately, you know it. They need a nap. You know that life will go well with them if they nap. Picture you. Are you a desperately needing a nap man or woman of God? Where God's like, can you just rest? You think you need a nap? I think you need to take a break. Are we any different than our toddlers? Up until recently, our culture helped us to stop and rest. Sabbath was built into the week. I learned this because I Wikipedia'd it. The Supreme Court of Canada once had a Lord's Day Act. I was so surprised. In 1982, this is not in like the 1800s. Okay, in 1982, the Supreme Court had a Lord's Day Act. And most provinces started opening up Sunday shopping in the late 80s or early 90s. Nova Scotia. Yeah. They didn't allow stores other than small convenience stores to open on Sundays until 2006.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I don't know what it was like in BC because I think when I moved here, stores were open on Sundays. Anybody remember a time when stores were closed on Sundays? Anybody old enough to remember? Oh, you guys are Ontarians though. Anybody in BC? Anybody remember? You don't remember? Okay, maybe BC did it early. So it used to be easier to Sabbath. Can you imagine being in a community where nothing's open? Nothing's open. Can't even put gas in your car. That's what it was like until recent history. Our society makes it so hard for us to rest. It is countercultural now for us to rest, but for centuries and centuries, since the creation of time, God's like, work and then take a break, rest. So that's why we should Sabbath. We need to live in God's flow. Then it will go well for us. Practicing Sabbath number two gives us a foretaste of the future, ultimate rest yet to come. Jesus came to be our true rest. We're not there yet. We're in the now and the not yet stage. We won't fully experience complete rest until we're with him in the new heavens and new earth. But Sabbath is a foretaste of eternity. It points to our future reality where we will find our ultimate rest in Jesus. It's not here yet, but every 7 days I can taste it. A little morsel of heaven on earth. A little foretaste of like, someday that's what it's going to be like to rest in God's presence. I can do that once a week. God has been writing this grand story from creation, teaching us that he is our rest. Our lives orient around him. He doesn't work around me. I remember that my ultimate destiny is not to have a nice house, not to have more money in the bank, not to have great kids and a great job, although those are great things. My ultimate destination is the rest of God. And when I practice Sabbath every week, and I remember that my destination is there and not this stuff, I find my truest and most joyful rest in him. We gotta take ourselves out of this rat race. We gotta have our eyes like above the timeline kind of view. That's where we're headed. Okay, third, practicing Sabbath reorients us back to reality where God is king and I am not. Ezekiel 20:12 says, I gave them my Sabbath days of rest as a sign between them and me. It was to remind them that I am the Lord, who had set them apart to be holy. We are addicted to being our own bosses. I fill in what goes on my calendar. I'm in charge of my time. It's what I want to do. And this is the one day a week where we can say, God, you're in charge of my time. I do what you want me to. Not every day should be, God, I do what you want to do, but especially the Sabbath. It should be a reminder that my life does not revolve around me, it revolves around him. Let's not be addicted to being our own bosses. By inconveniencing myself one day of the week, I'm reminding that the world revolves around him. So as we Sabbath, we're recalibrating once a week. Recalibrate, reformat. God, I spent a lot of time online shopping this week. I gotta recalibrate. You aren't enough. I have enough. It's resetting our minds and reformatting our priorities. Okay? Next, practicing Sabbath helps us practice trusting in him. We rest from working, thinking about working, wanting, and worrying. So literally, like what we talked about yesterday, it's writing down what I'm worried about at the beginning of my Sabbath, putting it in a box and saying, okay, I'm resting from my worrying today. Instead of toiling and striving to accomplish more or to accumulate more, we stop. We say, you know what? I don't need to achieve more today. I'm loved by God. I am enough. Or, I don't really need that extra whatever it is that's on your mind. I have enough stuff. We Canadians, we have too much stuff. I have enough, I am enough, and this one day a week, I just sit in God's love for me, and I say, I'm enough, I have enough. We acknowledge our limits. We say, God, I depend on you. I need you. I don't live because I'm a good hustler. You know, like, oh, look at the work of my hands. That's so prideful. We say, God, no. Everything I have comes from you. You're my provider. You're my sustainer, not me. And I don't know, some of you guys, especially, I don't know if this is more of a, I don't mean to generalize, but for men, maybe, some of you guys who are heads of your households, maybe there's that pressure. I gotta, oh no, we have this vacation coming up, or we have this, whatever. And God's like, you are enough. You are loved, okay? So that's what practicing helps us do, practicing Sabbath. When you look at even the way God provided manna, I love that. On only 6 days God brought manna. On the 7th day, no manna. So on day 6, you just pick up double what you need, and then on the Saturday, there was no manna. That's God saying, look, you don't have to gather the dew off the ground. Just, I already given you enough. It helps us to trust in him. Say, God, you are my provider, my sustainer. He wants us to rest. Lastly, practicing Sabbath helps me care for others. And as we practice rest, though we rest individually, we also extend rest to the people around us, the world around us. As I'm liberated from slavery, I also make sure I'm not a slave driver to others. We were talking about this yesterday. Maybe that means not going to a restaurant. I don't know. Paul says, be convicted about what you decide and stick with it. Honor God. That's the bottom line. So some people won't even do online shopping. Some people won't go out. They won't go to the market because someone's got to work to supply the market. I mean, so it depends. You have to decide with you and God, what am I convicted about? How do I uphold this not putting slavery on other people? On Friday, Tyler Staten, who's a pastor and author, he says that in our post-Christian world, people now who are not Christians, they tend to be more open to experiences than explanation. They don't want to read Case for Christ. They don't want a logical apologetic. They actually want to hear things from an authentic source. Somebody who's experienced something. They're actually suspicious of experts. So he says that Gen Z, they're not into apologetics. They're not into convince me, show me how many witnesses there were, whatever. They're like, show me. What does it look like to be a non-anxious presence? What does it look like to not be a worried person? What is it like to be somebody really peaceful? Show me. You don't have to convince me through logic. That's not going to work with them. How can we be a representative of our Prince of Peace when we're harried and exhausted and grumpy? Side note to parents, you have to be an example to your kids of joy, not of crankiness. This is a little rebuke. If you're cranky, how will the kids know the joy and the love of Jesus? Just sit with that one. I'm not saying that to be judgmental. This is part of my job. You guys pay me to do this, okay? How do we point to a Jesus who is our Prince of Peace, who is a God of joy, Who is a God of rest when I'm anxious, I'm grumpy, I'm cranky? How do we show authentic love? I'm not saying be perfect. There will be days, lots of days when we mess up. But if the overall trajectory of your parenting is grumpiness, crankiness, what are we teaching our kids? Okay, so all of these things, I know it's too many. How should we Sabbath? Go to HG, because the HGs will teach you, because I don't have time to go through it. HGs will get more practical, and then Doris and Jen, you're going to preach on this too, so they'll give you some more, hopefully. This is more of the big picture kind of view of Sabbath. I realized that for me, I love learning in community. So when the McKays and Goes and I were sitting yesterday at home group, and as we're discussing, we're watching John Mark Comer video, and we're discussing, and we're evaluating, and we're sharing, and hearing their testimonies, and being challenged by them, that's how I'm going to change and grow. So sermon series, you're not going to remember much of what I say. I'm still doing my best, but I know you're not going to remember. But it's practicing in community. Go to home group. Practice it with your brothers and sisters. That's the best way that we're going to learn how to Sabbath, okay? For me, for example, really quick, my Sabbath last Monday looked like a walk around UBC, where I just didn't have any music. I just walked, and I just tried to be present to God's presence. I read a little bit of Eugene Peterson. I also read my fun Christian historical book. I sat at the piano and I worshiped. I only did that for maybe 4 or 5 hours, okay? Because I'm trying to take baby steps. Some people are doing the whole 24 hours. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to be intentional about my time. Okay, so I'll let Doris and Jimmy take care of the rest. Okay, so it's too much. I'm gonna close. Back in 2018, I was given a sabbatical by our wonderful church, and for 3 months I was paid, but I didn't have to work. I totally did it wrong. I did not rest. What I thought was rest, and in the beginning everyone's like, you just need to decompress. I'm like, okay, I'll read Pride and Prejudice. Again, why? I don't know. Just read it again. I will watch the BBC version of Pride and Prejudice. Again, I don't know why. That's just what I wanted to do. And then I watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine. That was my sabbatical. Drew gave me a book. I didn't read it. I started it. What I needed actually was, I think, time to cry and just grieve like all the junk. I think I needed to have a spiritual director. I think I'm tired. I'm just really tired. I shouldn't say that. I'm tired. Because we're praying for a sermon. Okay. I'm going to really have a good Sabbath tomorrow, okay? I needed to process with my spiritual director. I needed to feed my soul with good friends and good food. I needed to pray, to have someone challenge me. That's what I should have done in my sabbatical. I feel so bad that I wasted that. Maybe in 3 years, they'll give me another one if I'm still here. So I should have had disciplines in place that would have brought healing and restoration to my soul, and I didn't. That's not true rest. Practicing Sabbath is a means to an end. The end is found in Jesus. I'm going to read this from Matthew 11 in the Message version. Listen to Jesus talking to you. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. I want you to take that as Jesus speaking directly to you. We've thought freedom is doing what I want to do, when I do it, when I want to do it, whatever I want to do. But the reality is that we're all yoked to something. That's the reality. All of us. We're yoked to maybe wanting more, being more. We're driven for something more. And Jesus is saying, he's not saying like, come to me and then do whatever you want. I'm going to take it off. It's like, no, I'm going to put my yoke on you. Come to me because it's in my way of living that you're going to actually find rest. I know it makes no logical sense. But actually, when we yoke ourselves to Jesus is when we'll find our most amazing ultimate rest. He's saying, you're going to find that you're much more rested when you put my yoke on you, when you find your life under my rule. He loves you. He wants what's best for you, and let him help you rest as you respond to his love for you. So I just want to encourage you guys, sometimes the spiritual practices sound dull or sound like restrictive. But if you can trust me on this, take my word, that it's actually when we decide, I want to put myself in a place where I can experience God more, sometimes you're going to have boundaries, right? So, sometimes people hear of Sabbath like, not be on my phone for 8 hours? That's impossible. Maybe start with 2 hours. Start with half an hour, I don't know, whatever your level of, maybe addiction to the phone is. But Jesus is promising, I promise you, if you will trust me and you'll give me your time, I'm going to make you feel rested. But it actually will take us to take that step of faith to do that. So I'm going to pray for us, but then I want to have you guys just talk really, really fast. It seems late, but worship started late, and then we went late. So, but let me just pray for you guys. Lord, I thank you so much that you are a God who loves us. This is not about rules and religion. God, you want us to put your yoke on us, because in there is the truest freedom and the truest rest. Help us to say no to the lies of the enemy, who wants to keep distracting us by making us feel like rest is vegging, that rest is being on our phones and just doom scrolling, or that rest is, I don't know, whatever it is that we have in mind. God, true rest is found as we seek you, as we're found in you, as we make time for you. And so, Lord, give us help, give us strength. Help us not to be like, we need to add more. God, but help us to really just be attentive to what are you asking us to do? It's going to look different on each one of us. What are you asking us to do? So I pray that you would give us your strength, and give us your love to be able to do this well. We just invite you to continue to work in us, be formed in us, Jesus. We need you. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, I'll give you like 5 minutes, just really, really quick, just one person. Anything that God spoke to you about regarding Sabbath. And also, is there something practical that you guys can do? And if you don't know, that's okay, because you'll discuss that in HGs, okay? 3 minutes, go.